Issue 1, April 15th, 2026. God bless. Here is the first working digest for the archive. Executive snapshot. This week's strongest development is not a smoking gun for a lost Tartarian civilization, but a credible historical clarification. The Library of Congress published a 2025 explainer showing that Tartaria-Tartaria functioned as a shifting cartographic label on European and American maps from roughly the 13th through 19th centuries, not as evidence of a single stable hidden empire. The same explainer notes that the mapped area changed over time, often covered many different peoples, and increasingly broke into labels such as Western Tartary, Chinese-Tartary, Independent Tartary, and Muscovite Tartary. At the same time, new and newly surfaced digitized primary sources do matter for research. The Library of Congress continues to host maps such as the 1834, a general map of China, Chinese-Tartary and Tibet, and the Portal to Texas History has a digitized 1806, a new map of Chinese and Independent Tartary. These do not validate the modern conspiracy narrative, but they do expand the documentary library of historical uses of the term. On the adjacent science side, there is real current work on geopolymer mortars, masonry rehabilitation, provenance analysis, and historical material conservation. That does not prove lost advanced civilization claims, but it does show why some Tartaria-adjacent discussions about unusual stone, mortar, or construction methods remain worth watching, provided they are kept separate from unsupported global reset narratives. A 2025 review highlights geopolymer mortars as promising for masonry rehabilitation, while 2025-2026 heritage science work is advancing non-destructive provenance methods for historical materials and architectural elements. What looks most important this week? 1. Strongest credible development. Library of Congress clarification on Tartary. The LOC's June 20, 2025 post says, Tartary was a wandering place name on old maps, not a modern geopolitical reality. It explains that the English Tartary derives from Latin Tartaria, tied to Tartars, Tatars, and notes the designation was doubtful as a self-description for most of the peoples so labeled. It also explicitly says later maps split the term into multiple sub-regions rather than preserving one coherent empire. Why it matters? This is the clearest recent mainstream institutional source directly touching the Tartaria question itself. 2. New library value. More public map access, not new proof. The Library of Congress entry for the 1834 map, a general map of China Chinese-Tartary and Tibet, confirms that such labels persisted in formal cartography well into the 19th century. The Portal to Texas History entry for a new map of Chinese and Independent Tartary describes an 1806 map covering Independent and Chinese Tartary with geographical notes. Why it matters? These are useful primary source artifacts for your growing library. They support the reality of the label on maps, but not the larger erased civilization thesis. 3. No credible confirmation of Putin-released Tartaria documents. The material still surfacing around that claim remains low-grade and unsupported. By contrast, the stronger recent documentary trail is coming from public libraries and map archives, not state disclosures. The best current evidence continues to point toward historical map terminology rather than hidden state archives. 4. The World's Fair. Ornate building angles still fails under ordinary documentation. One of the most common Tartaria claims is that ornate exposition architecture could not have been temporary. The National Park Service's 1915 World's Fair material directly states that the fair's physical structures were built to be temporary, and that most were torn down shortly after closure. It also records the fair's filled land construction and technological spectacle, which helps explain why photographs can look implausible to modern viewers. Why it matters. This is one of the cleaner rebuttals to a major Tartaria talking point. 5. Real science worth tracking historic masonry, geopolymers, and provenance. A 2025 review in Springer describes geopolymer mortars as promising for repair and rehabilitation of masonry. A 2025 NPJ Heritage Science article presents non-destructive methods for identifying the provenance of historic building stone, and a 2026 NPJ Heritage Science piece addresses interoperable provenance data for architectural elements. Meanwhile, a March 2026 preprint on geopolymers in heritage conservation is explicitly not peer-reviewed, but it still points to active investigation of adhesion, compatibility, and strength in ancient and historic substrates. Why it matters? This is where speculation can sometimes be converted into testable material questions. Conspiracy side signals. This week, the modern Tartaria narrative remains active online and continues to cluster around the same claims: mudfloods, erased chronology, reattributed architecture, sound frequency buildings, and World's Fair remnants. Discover's updated 2025 article summarizes the claim pattern plainly. Believers argue that a sophisticated Tartarian civilization was erased, that mudfloods buried much of it, and that surviving monumental buildings were given false modern histories. The article specifically notes Notre Dame, the U.S. Capitol, and World's Fair structures as recurring examples in the narrative. That same ecosystem continues to be discussed by researchers of misinformation. GNet notes that Tartaria has circulated on TikTok and Reddit as a form of pseudo-history, and warns that such narratives can connect to more extreme ideological threads. Credibility scale for this week's findings: Strong, Verified Library of Congress, 2025. Explanation of Tartary as a shifting historical map label. LOC and UNT digital map records showing Chinese-Tartary, Independent Tartary, and similar terms in historical cartography. National Park Service confirmation that most Panama Pacific Fair structures were temporary and torn down. Current scholarly work on geopolymer rehabilitation and heritage material provenance. Plausible but unconfirmed. Specific claims that unusual stone or mortar methods in ancient or historic monuments may reflect underappreciated material technologies. This is plausible as a research question, but each site must be tested case by case. Current evidence supports investigation, not sweeping civilizational conclusions. Speculative: global Tartarian reset, worldwide mudflood, coordinated architectural reattribution, sound bath cathedrals, and official archive release stories. These remain narrative motifs, not evidenced conclusions. Weak. Contradicted. The idea that old maps alone prove a unified hidden empire. The most authoritative recent mapping source points the other way. Tartary moved around, fragmented into subregions, and did not represent a single enduring political designation. Research notes for your archive. A useful working distinction is emerging. Layer A. Historical cartographic reality. Tartary Tartaria absolutely existed as a label on maps. This is real and documentable. Layer B. Modern interpretive leap. The leap from old maps used this name to therefore a suppressed global civilization built most monumental architecture is not supported by the strongest current evidence. Layer C. Adjacent technical questions still worth studying. Construction material mysteries, unusual stone fit, geopolymer possibilities, filled urban layers, and provenance gaps are valid research territories. They simply need to be handled as engineering, archaeology, and conservation questions, rather than proof by vibes. Suggested watch list for next week: I will treat these as recurring bins in future reports. New primary maps or archive releases from LOC, World Digital Library, UNT, Europeana, Gallica, David Rumsey, and National Archives. Claims of official disclosure involving Russia, CIA files, Vatican archives, or declassified Tartaria stories. Material science overlaps involving geopolymers, reconstituted stone, heritage mortar compatibility, and non-destructive testing. Urban archaeology, buried floor explanations that may speak to mudflood-style claims without endorsing them. Misinformation trend analysis as Tartaria narratives migrate across platforms. bottom line for Issue 1. This week does not produce credible evidence of a newly validated lost Tartarian civilization. It does produce 3 solid pillars for the research library: a strong recent institutional explanation of what Tartary meant on maps, additional primary source map records worth cataloging, and a meaningful scientific side channel in conservation materials and provenance research that may help separate real anomalies from internet mythology. I can also turn this first report into a formal archival template with headings like claim, source, evidence type, credibility score, and follow-up questions for all future weekly editions. Tartaria, Tartarian Weekly Highlights. There was no credible breakthrough this week establishing a lost Tartarian civilization. The most useful developments were a strong recent historical clarification from the Library of Congress, newly surfaced or newly noticed digitized map records that preserve historical uses of Tartary, and adjacent heritage science work on stone provenance and masonry repair that is relevant to some Tartaria-adjacent claims about unexplained building methods. Stronger evidence developments. The most important recent source is the Library of Congress post Tracking Tartary on Western Maps, published in June 2025. It explains that Tartary was a shifting label used on European and American maps from roughly the 13th through 19th centuries, and that the mapped area was not stable from map to map. It also notes that later maps often split the label into narrower regions, such as Western Tartary, Chinese-Tartary, and related subregions, rather than showing one coherent empire. That interpretation lines up with digitized primary material now easy to inspect online. The Library of Congress hosts the 1834 map, a general map of China, Chinese-Tartary and Tibet, and the Portal to Texas History hosts John Carey's 1806, a new map of Chinese and Independent Tartary. These are real historical map artifacts showing that Tartary and its variants were genuine cartographic terms, but by themselves they support the existence of an old naming convention more than the modern erased civilization narrative. A second useful corrective concerns World's Fair architecture, which is central to many Tartaria claims. National Park Service material on the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition says the site was built on more than 630 acres of filled bayfront wetlands, and states that the fair's physical structures were intended to be temporary, with most torn down shortly after the fair closed. The surviving Palace of Fine Arts is presented as an exception that was spared and later reinforced. On the science side, a 2025 review in Discover Sustainability reports that geopolymer mortars show significant potential for masonry repair and rehabilitation, while 2025 NPJ Heritage Science papers describe non-destructive methods for identifying the provenance of historical building and decoration stones, including portable XRF-based comparison work for architectural stone. None of this validates Tartaria claims, but it does show that how was this material made or sourced? Questions can be investigated with modern methods instead of speculation. Conspiracy-oriented signals worth tracking. The conspiracy ecosystem itself is still active, but the pattern remains familiar, rather than newly evidenced. Recent popular summaries describe the same core package of claims: Tartaria as an advanced civilization, mud floods burying whole cities, iconic buildings being reattributed, and World's Fair architecture being treated as surviving Tartarian remains. Discover's overview and a 2025 popular history recap both describe these themes while noting the lack of reliable evidence behind them. A notable risk signal is that Tartaria continues to be treated by misinformation researchers as pseudo-history with potential overlap into more extreme narratives. GNet's analysis uses Tartaria as an example of a seemingly harmless online historical myth that can open the door to more conspiratorial or extremist framings. Some recent online content still pushes stronger versions of the claim, including the idea that maps prove a suppressed global empire, or that exposition buildings could not have been temporary. Those claims remain weak against the current documentary record, especially the Library of Congress explanation of the term, and the National Park Service documentation on fair construction and demolition. Best current take. What is strongest right now is this: Tartary was a real historical map label, and more digitized map material keeps making that easier to document. What is still not supported is the leap from those labels to a recently erased, technologically advanced, globally dominant civilization. The more promising research lane is not the grand conspiracy claim, but careful work on maps, construction history, urban fill, material provenance, and masonry science. References consulted Library of Congress. Tracking Tartary on Western maps. Library of Congress. A general map of China Chinese-Tartary N.A.M.P. Tibet, 1834. Portal to Texas History. A new map of Chinese N.A.M.P. Independent Tartary, 1806. National Park Service. The 1915 World's Fair. National Park Service. Palace of Fine Arts History page. Discover Sustainability, 2025. Review of geopolymer mortars for masonry rehabilitation. NPJ Heritage Science, 2025 papers on non-destructive provenance methods for historic building stone. Discover Magazine and GNet backgrounders on Tartaria as a conspiracy pseudo-history narrative.